Okay, good morning. My name is Samantha Mirabal with Milko's application team doing our DesignShop Talk today. See what questions you guys might have, try to get them answered. I have some questions that were sent in ahead of time. I'm going to start with those, and then we will kind of jump over into the chat and see what questions you might have. Type them in on the chats. We're live on both Facebook and YouTube, so if you type them in there, I will see them pop up on my other monitor over here. I don't see them if you send them to me privately, so type them in on the chats and I should be able to keep track of all those. So let's see what we can get into today. All right. Actually, let me make sure both platforms are up. There's YouTube, excellent, and there is Facebook. We are good to go. Good morning, Sherry. Thanks for joining today. And Rachel from Michigan. Should be warming up. I'm always cold though, so. All right. I'm not sure if this is design shop related, but when embroidering on burlap, so this stuff, should you use 505? I embroidered a design, but had a slight shift in the outline. I used a fabric backing piece along with fusible cutaway that was fused to the backing. Also floated 2 layers of Madeira. Should I have done something floated topping? Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. Okay, so there's a few things going on with this. When you sew on things like this, all right, that have, I'm going to call it twine or rope, however you want to think of it. It's a very large piece of thread that is kind of interwoven, right, the spaces. When your stitching falls on one side of that and then to another, there's no way to avoid that jagged look that comes because it's switching from one side of the grain to the other. Okay, so you can see some of that right here, like when it's going over that thing to the next little gap and then it runs nice and smooth, and then you've got, as it's going over those individual cords, you get gaps and switches between how it sews. So there's really no way to avoid that. Okay. What you would need to do, you did all the right stuff. So if you fused backing to it, you don't need 505, right? That fusible is going to hoop it. As long as you're hooping the backing that you fused to it, then you are good to go. But this is really just a function of the grain of the material. So you can see it's on one side of this line and then it jumps to another. So that's where your shift is coming from, the actual material. Okay. You can try using an edge walk to help put a layer of thread on top of it to help stop it from being so dramatic. So you can do an edge walk with then a zigzag over it, and that might help a little bit. It probably would, because basically you're going to build up thread on top of it so that when your top stitching comes across, it has something else to rest on rather than just the twill, that really heavy yarn underneath it. You could also do things like treat it like a patch. So instead of sewing all this red down, you could put a piece of red patch material down, and that would help the edge look a little bit more crisp. So that's another technique you could do. But that's really just a function of the material you're sewing on. Okay, does that make sense? Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. So we have a question typed in. I'll come back to this one. I reverted lettering to applique and the corners don't come out correctly. The middle of the capital letter A distorts. So you can always just go into the wireframe editing, right? So I don't know, let's see, make it big, shift, properties, tell it to be an applique, apply. All right, so if any part of this isn't showing up how you want it to, right, you can select this, go right click, wireframe editing, and from here you can modify it to be whatever you want it to be. Right, I can add points, I can move points around. Not that I want my A to look like that, but you get the idea. So if an area is coming out weird, you can also go in and just add or modify points so that it's more suited to what you need to do. Okay, so if I'm making a big old mess, but you see it's pretty straightforward to modify it. And once you're happy with all the wireframe edits, the ones I've made are pretty atrocious here, but let's see, let's move all those points so I can select all the points, and let's move them over. All right, That's an atrociously, but you know, it's dramatic anyway. You can see that I can modify the wireframe and it'll correct whatever points you want. So if you ever get weird things happening, whether it's in your regular letters or in applique, it really doesn't matter. If you want to modify something, rather than converting it, you can go into edit wireframe editing and just modify the wireframe as you see fit to look how you want it to look. All right. So like I said, I'm making a big old mess, but you get the idea, hopefully. Phil, does that help at all? Let me know. All right. Let's see. What else do we have? When I convert lettering to wireframe, is there a way to convert it back? No. Undo. That converts it back, but undo will also change. But in the same way I just showed, you don't have to convert it to wireframe to make changes to the wireframe itself, right? So let's use I want a different font. Okay. Let's say I want this to kind of swirl over the top of this for whatever reason, right? So I can digitize it myself, you know, as an additional element that goes around, right? So I could do something like this. Okay, so I could do that. Or I could come into this, select the lettering, the X right there. If I click on the X, I can right click and say wireframe editing. And now I can modify the wireframe and move it around, change the shape of it, you know, whatever I need to do, I can do that. So I can add points, move these around, right? Add a point there, move it over. All right, so I'm going to delete what I've done so far. There. So you can see I modified the A to add it going up, and I can keep playing with it. So you can modify any of the wireframes rather than, so if you need to adjust a single point, right click, operations, wireframe editing. And then you can go adjust its points. So wireframe editing, go adjust the individual points. So that's how that's done for both the lettering and your applique. Okay, hopefully that helps some. Oh, if you do convert it, there is one trick I can show you. It doesn't fix the fact that you got a million tabs over here. So if I take this and say operations, convert to wireframe, it doesn't change the fact that I got a million things over here, but I can select this whole thing and say group. And now, anytime I click on it, it treats them as a single element, right? So it stops you from accidentally doing one of these, clicking on that, and dragging it over here, right? So if you want it to move as a unit, you can select everything and then click right here and say group. And at least that way, every time you select it, it moves as one. Okay. All right, so we did those two. I stitched a project yesterday and found it not to be where I needed it. I thought I moved it by pressing the hoop and the direction arrows. It did move, but when you hit green go, it moved the design back to where the spot it was before. Okay, so once you start a design and you move it within the hoop, so let's say I start it, it sews a few stitches and I go, I don't want it to sew there. So you hit stop, you trim it, you move the hoops around. You can't just hit start because it will move back to its prior position and keep sewing, right? So if you move it manually using the hoop and the arrow buttons, and wherever you move it to, that is where you want it to continue sewing. You have to push the up and down arrows together. So let me find a keypad. Where's a keypad picture? So you have to push these two arrows together, and that will basically say start, count this as the new location and start sewing for the current stitch. All right. So once a design is started, you've got to hit, if you move it, it'll automatically go back to the prior location unless you hit up down arrow. Okay. Yeah, we got you a link to the keypad functions so you can see that. All right, can you clarify the following? Converting any file to wireframe, then I go to properties, choosing multiple stitch element gives you the opportunity to edit. What do you do with the files that only show expanded? Okay, so when you have expanded files, you can still modify some things, right? Let me go open one. File, open, C drive, designs. Nope, that does not say designs, does it? There we go. Legacy, and I'm gonna open up this because it's an expanded format. All right, so expanded formats have no wireframe information. They have no math. It's essentially a list of coordinates that your machine moves to make needle penetrations, right? So if you want to change the density or underlays or things of this, you can right click, go to scale, and this will let you play with some of the stuff. You can add some pull compensation. There's fill, columns, if you want to play with densities, those sorts of things. So this is the tab that will modify your expanded stuff. Now, if you convert, so if you have a wireframe file, so I'll go open a wireframe one. That one. All right, so this is wireframe based. I can select the whole, I can select the whole thing, go to properties, and then here you can select what it is you want to modify. So I can say I want to modify satin stitches, or I want to modify a whole bunch of stuff at once. Let's add, auto underlay to everything. Okay, so yes, you can go through and say, oh, well, the bean stitches, I really want those to be 5 instead of 3. I want the normals to have a different stitch length. So you can do gross changes amongst everything just by going through here. I want to modify the fills, so maybe you want to change the density of the fills. Okay, so all of that made changes to all the elements in here based on what I had selected. All right, so it's really just a matter of going to a different place to edit. So I come to the scale tab, and whatever is available to modify will show up here. Versus when you go here, properties, when it's wireframe based, you can use this tab down here to change different things. All right. Does that help? So did I get the actual question? Make sure I answered it. Yeah, so I talked about all that. All right, a question was typed in. I'm trying to connect font Cambria true type font to a manual stitch, but it won't connect. I tried turning off auto trim, tie-ins, tie-in. So where are you trying to connect it? Between letters or from element to element? All right, so what I mean by that, do I even have that font? I do. All right, so are you trying to add manual stitches between these letters or from this to something else? Because if you're trying to add it between the letters, it's not really going to do anything unless you modify your properties here or you break these into separate lettering elements, right? Because if I want these two letters to connect, I would have to come over here and say closest points, and then auto apply. Let's do that. And then under the tie-in and tie-off properties, I would have to come over and set the different properties here to dictate that this distance, I want it to have a jump stitch or a manual stitch going from here to here rather than trimming, right? Right now, my properties are set to trim every 32 points. So if the distance from where this ends to where that starts is greater than 32, it's going to trim, right? How big is that? Let's measure it. So David, let me know where you're trying to put that manual stitch and I can help. So right now that's 33 points. All right, so let's make this 64. And you'll see now it's going to drag a stitch across there. Okay. So there's that. Now, if you want to literally digitize a manual stitch between this and that letter, you're going to have to split it into multiple lettering elements. So copy, paste. I'm going to go delete Amantha from one of them. Take these two, left align, And then take this, delete the S, and then select those. Oops, I can't select those two because I got rid of it. There you go. So now, where one element ends to where the next starts, which is there, I can now digitize a manual stitch in there. Okay, because then it would be between that letter and that letter. Does that help, David? Anyway, let me know what's going on, what you're trying to do a little more specific, and I can help. All right. Excuse me. Okay, so we talked about that one. We talked about that one. That was the up-down arrows. Do I have a coffee? I've got like a tickle in my throat. And we did that. Okay, so those were all the questions that were sent in ahead of time. What other questions might you guys have we can go through? Did some editing of lettering wireframes. That's always a cool trick. So if you're not aware of that, use that. I use it quite often, actually. Ooh, another trick on that. Let's say there's a particular font. Sorry. Oh, I don't know what font. All right, this isn't a good font, or it's not a font that I want to modify. I like it. But let's say you went and modified this to be something else, right? I don't know. I don't want to do this, so I'm not going to save it. But let's say we're putting that on all the fonts. I can right click and tell it to save letter, and then it will always turn, every time I go to type that letter, it will show up that way. That also works with TrueType fonts. So if one particular TrueType font is doing it in one letter one way, and then it does that same letter a different way, you can pick the one you want, save it by clicking here, save letter, and it will overwrite it. So every time it does that letter, that's how it goes. Is there a way to turn a built-in fonts from satin stitch to a wall stitch? Is that a walk? Oh, for example, on a tea towel, not using a satin, but a bean or walk stitch to prevent puckering. Okay. So, kind of, I could, on this one, yeah, I could take this one, hold the shift key down, and then click on walk stitch, and then let me turn that off and show you what it did, right? So now I can turn that into a bean, and now I've got that font written out as a bean stitch. So yeah, you can do that. Rachel, is that what you're wanting to do? So again, what I did is I selected a font element, held the shift key. You can also, let's see. Yeah, the other way you can do it is by selecting the lettering. If you can't remember the shift trick, hold this guy down. I'm right here, change element from one type to another. You can say bean, add, and now I've got this letter. This is not Illustrator. I can't use those keys. So now I've got that letter. So you can either shift click or control click will convert it completely. So control click on that will replace the lettering element with just a walk stitch, and then you can tell it to be a bean. Shift click adds it, or if you can't remember shift or control, you can use this guy right here, change element type. Yep, element to element. So change element type from lettering to whatever it is you want it to go to. Walk, bean, add. And then there it is. Okay. Element, manual stitch from there to there. There it is. So it adds the manual stitch right there. From the S to the A, I now have a manual stitch in there. If I want more needle penetrations along it to bury a stitch, I can put one there. What? Font manual to common. In other words, you did not use lettering. You digitized the Cambria font by hand, David. So operations, convert to lettering. So now it's a column ending there. It would start there, end there, and there's my additional needle penetration. Going over to this, you want it to go to another column, operations, convert to wireframe. It's still there. So letter, there's the manual stitch. It's just a matter of paying attention to your starts and stops, that they're on top of each other. Does that help at all, David? I guess I'm not, the manual stitch, I'm able to digitize it right in and add the different needle penetrations that I want between the different elements. I have a design that you had digitized by Q Digitizing. How do I edit the width of the letters? It depends on how they digitized it for you. If you have it as an expanded stitch type, then you can add some amount of pull compensation using this expanded tab. So, or the scale tab, right click, scale, and right here you would add your pull compensation. So you would, add 1 to 3 points or something like that. If they did it as a lettering element for you, or it's a wireframe based, so let's say it's wireframe, you would come in like this guy here, right click properties and go under pull compensation. You would add compensation there, and that will make it bolder. That would change the width of it. If they did it as a lettering element, it's the same way. You would come over here, select, it would say lettering instead, and you come to the compensation tab and type in pull, some pull compensation. So bridal association, it really depends on how they digitized it for you. It was a, yeah, but so it's a crest with lettering in the crest. That's cool, but you would need to, is it wireframe based or expanded based? Meaning when you open this stuff up over here, does it say things like this? Or does it say things like this, expanded? If it says expanded, you're very limited on what you can edit, right? You would right click on it, go to scale, and those are the things you can do. If they give it to you in wireframe, you would just select on what you want. So like all this, right click, go to properties, go to multi-element compensation, and you would add pull compensation to it. Yeah, if it's expanded, you're very limited on what you can do. So you would have to come over to the scale tab and use pull comp here. Okay. Let's see. Let me quick scroll back up on the comments, make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, Bridal Association. That's why we're here. We're here to help. Someone typed in, it's all new to me. Don't worry about it. That's why I'm here, trying to help. So let us know. There's no question too small. Let me know what you want to learn, and we'll try to go over it. When we tried using athletic block font size 1.4, satin density 3.8, so lots of things. Okay. When sewing, it runs and looks fine until the border. After the border runs, we lose the block at the right side of the number 4. I don't know what you mean, the block at the right side of the number 4. Okay, let me type. What are you trying to sew? So, Summer, with your question, you gave a lot of settings and the font. All right. So, let's see, we tried using athletic block. Sorry, I'm trying to read through. It's a really long comment there. Athletic block font. Okay, sized 1.4. All right. When sewing, all right, number 4. All right, properties, satin stitch. All right, so under top stitching, you have it set to satin. Density, you have it set to 3.8. pull offset to 1, underlay. I personally like the auto way better than setting it yourself, but you have it set to double zigzag. You added an auto border. So I would auto border. Okay. So my guess is, so a few things. The auto border, I personally prefer to do the borders a different way. So just, this is food for thought here. All right, instead of using auto borders, I personally prefer to digitize the borders and put them underneath the letter and just make the border wider. I like how it sews and looks better when you do it with the border underneath and then the letter on top. It ends up being really pretty. Plus, the border over here sews wider, so you have more overlap and you're less likely to have gaps between your border and your text. That's 100% a personal preference. Okay. You said it doesn't sew well. You would have to send me a file so I can look at it, because I've never seen where it doesn't sew what I've put in here, right? So what you can do if you want to just test to see if there's something going on with the file, you can do a save it as a DST and run the DST file. Because the DST is going to get rid of all the math associated with it and just give you needle penetrations. And if that doesn't sew right, or if that sews correct and the other doesn't, then we might look at the OFM and see if there's something going on there. Otherwise, I'd need to look at it, your specific one. Yeah, so the border I just did. So the question was, how did I just do that? So I selected this and selected my letter, went to change element from one type to another, single line, say add, and then I moved it so it sews first, and then made it wider. So that's how I personally prefer to do borders. Like I said, is it wrong to do the border second? No, it's not. I'm just saying this is what looks pretty to me, and that's what's kind of fun about digitizing. We all think different things look good, so makes us all unique, right? So. All right, what other questions do we have? Can you talk to me after this? Kind of. In the Facebook groups, yeah. So, yeah. In the Facebook groups, I'm pretty active in those. So there's 3 of them that I'm in. So if you ask questions on those, you'll see, typically I'll respond, particularly when I'm tagged. There's the class that you can do with Melco. It's the 4-hour personal, I forget what they call it. It's 4-hour digitizing training. So, and those we can break up into multiple sessions. And so I've done that a few times for folks. So, there's a lot of avenues for you. And then I'm always happy to sit here and answer questions. All right, what other questions? Let me scroll, make sure I didn't miss any. There you go. Dan got you the link to the 4-hour. David, applications, or sorry, that one you want to send to service@melco.com with a description of what's going on and see if they can help you. Or they can get the file to one of us that can look at it and see what's going on with your particular situation there. So for your manual stitch. Yeah. So personalized training one-on-one is, it's a cost, right? So for the digitizing one, we have a link up there for the 4-hour that you can look in the comments. I think it's even on Shop Melco's site. Oh yeah, it is on Shop Melco's site. So, and that's personal training. It's set up between you and whatever trainer is available for you. There's a handful of us that do those. So, and then we work with you for your specific needs and, go over stuff. There's a lot of free resources available for you on YouTube, these design shop talks and things like that. With the machine, there's the on-site training you can always do. And in the on-site training is specific to trying to get you running on your machine, right? So there is a little bit of digitizing discussed, but it's more intended to set you up for running your equipment, because that's really hands-on, where the digitizing, like here, we can go over it on a computer. So yeah, the personalized digitizing training is an additional cost. And it's basically 4-hour increments. You can always contact your trainer too, whoever trained you, to see if they have any suggestions on digitizing training. So there's that as well. But we got you a link to some resources for you. Awesome, Sherry. Said they did Melco University and learned a lot. I'm glad to hear that. I was trying to convert the font Century into a puff stitch for hat. Is there a video that explains how to do that? Okay. You're not going to be able to convert that font specifically to puff without work, right? There are fonts in here digitized specifically for puff. That's these guys. If you want to use others, can you? Yes, but it's work, right? That's not the one you wanted. You wanted Century Redux. Let me go grab it. And I'll explain why. Puff. Okay, and we don't need it that big. Okay, so remember, when you're digitizing things from puff, you have to have needle penetrations all the way around every edge to be able to cut the font, right? So you do have the option, whoa, I went click happy there, right click properties, styles, puff alphabets. This is not a puff alphabet, but it will apply some settings to it. This is specifically designed to work with the puff fonts. So you see, but you can start there. But here's the thing, you're going to have to modify the font or add features, because this stitch goes from here to here. That means if I don't do something underneath this, I'm going to end up with the puff hanging out here, not cut. So I'm going to have to come under here and add a cap like that. And this, of course, is going to go whoa, come back. I wanted to zoom. So that will need to be underneath, not on top like I have here. And it will also need to have the density appropriate for puff and things like that. So this would be, turn that off, make that closer to 1.9, right? So now I have needle penetrations underneath here. When I move it, that will end up cutting that puff along there. So you would have to evaluate each letter individually and add those features along. So for this font, you're going to need one there, or this letter, one here, copy paste, one here. Ooh, not drag, like that. So you're going to have to address all three of those edges. Otherwise, it's not going to cut the puff. On the U, you've got here, here. You probably need to do something with this corner right here, and then this edge right there, that edge and that edge. Okay, so what I would suggest is once you get the lettering, the text you want, convert it to wireframe, and then fix it specifically for your application, right? So go through and think about all of that. Make sure you've got your running stitch down along the edge to hold the puff down, do your capping, and then do the top stitching. Then go to the next one and continue on. Okay. All right. Let's see. What else do we have? So, Rachel, does that help at all? We do have quite a few things, resources available for puff, both digitizing it and sewing it. So check those out. Hopefully we'll get those links for you. But yeah, there's a ton of them out there. But yeah, the key is, if you're using non-puff digitized fonts, is every single letter you have to think about it and plan it out to make sure you're capping or pinching the edges so that all the way around you have needle penetrations. Okay, if not, the puff's not going to rip off and it's going to make a mess. Okay, so that's really the key there. We did get you the link to the puff resources in there. All right, can I discuss corners? I prefer what is cut instead of the stitching stretching across the edges. I hope that makes sense. I don't quite understand the question. I'm trying to think about that. This font doesn't have corners. Okay, let's try that again. AM. Those should have some corners, and change it to maybe, what, I'm trying to think of a font that has sharp points. I think the Century Gothic does. Where's Century Goth? Yeah, that one has points. Okay. I prefer when it's cut instead of stitching stretching across the edges. So I don't understand that right there. So I'm not sure how to answer it at the moment. Yeah, let's see. So Anna, if you can clarify what you're wanting to do with the corners, I can help. But at the moment, I don't quite understand what you're wanting to achieve. Why is there so much space between the plate and the cap? It seems to be so loose. That's adjustable. So you, well, all right. There is some amount of adjustability on the frame itself, right? So the cap frame. I'm trying to find, do I have a picture of one? Okay, Milko. Yeah, okay. So the distance from this red thing right here to Milko service, and where's the parts manual? And this red plate right there. All right. So come back between the inside curve of this red thing and the top of your plate, you can digitize that. Okay. Digitize. You can adjust that. We have a link on the cap driver adjustment for you that talks about how that's done. So where you can get this closer to the plate by changing, you loosen some screws, make some adjustments, and you can change that spacing. Okay. So yeah, that is adjustable. So if yours happens to be really high off the plate, you can adjust that. The rest of it comes down to your hooping. Some of the hats are so darn stiff and they have so much buckram and everything, and they're at weird angles that no matter how much you hoop it down to the, you try to push that cap down so that it meets the gauge. The gauge being, let me see if I can find a picture of it. Of course not, because these are just going to be these parts. Sorry, I'm trying to find you a picture of the gauge, hat gauge, just so, because I wave my hands around a lot. I guess I can go unscrew it off. Oh, right there, cap gauge. Oops, back. I don't want that. Rachel, I'm not forgetting you. I'll be there in a minute. So when you're actually going to hoop the hat, you know how you put the cap frame on here and you're pulling on the hat, trying to smooth it down, because this is where the plate on your machine is. So if in the end your hat is above this gauge, it's going to be above the plate when you go to sew it, right? So it's just some hats you cannot pull down tight enough to get it really close to the plate. That's about all. Okay. So John, some of it you can adjust out. We got you a link for that. The rest, it's really a function of the hats and hooping and how tight you pull down on the hooping. Question, can DesignShop 12 redigitize a purchase DST file? Well, yeah, you click through it, right? Purchase DST file. Let's pretend this one's purchased. It's a EXP, but EXP DSTs, it's all the same difference. I can take this thing, right click, operations, convert to wireframe, and now this is digitized and editable, right? So I can convert to wireframe and use that, right? So now that's something I can modify. I can scale, I can change its density, I can change the shape, and it will all adjust the stitches accordingly. Okay, so Alex, does that help at all? So yes, you can. I just say be careful with converting stuff from expanded to wireframe. It's depending on what you're converting, it doesn't always come over correctly. So, all right. Anna, you clarified for me, so let me come back and look at that. So not using a pre-digitized font. When digitizing your own, see the A, the cut at the upper section. Okay, so different ways to digitize an A. That's kind of what I'm getting away from that. That you're trying to do your own font, and you want to know different ways to handle these corners. Okay, so when you're doing your own digitizing of things, right, you know, you have whatever art you're going for. So you can come over here and do things like, oops, not like that. Let's not do it that way. That doesn't really work. So I can go like that. That's too much overlap. Let's try that again. Here to there, and maybe there to there. And then I can go like this. Oops, backspace. You can tell I'm not thinking about this clearly. There we go. All right, so I can create my own little mitered area like that. All right, making sure I have overlap between the two elements so that it's nice and clean. So that's one way you can do it. If you want to cap the ends, you can come over, and I'm just going to continue digitizing on top of this thing. Backspace. There to there. And then we can do this A from here to there. And then I can go from there to there and there to there. Right? So I can cap it. And my stitch directions are a little bit long, or my stitch lengths are a little bit long right there. So that's a consideration, right? So let me move my guys over so they're not always on top of each other so we can see the different things. So we got that one, and we got this one. Let's say we want to miter it straight down the middle instead, right? So I want to miter right here. How would we handle that? Well, ooh, come back. I don't want that. Go away. I want this. All right. So I can go here to here, here to, no, let's not do it that way. There to there, there to there. And then I can, again, go here to there, there to there. Okay, so I can miter it like that. I probably would want to modify my points up here to make it a little cleaner personally, but you know, so you can miter it like this. Other ways you can handle these are to use fills, right? So I can come over here and digitize these elements as a fill and then add split lines and stitch directions, right? So if I do this whole thing as a fill, give it a start point, oops, I don't want any holes, hit enter, stitch direction. All right, let's change that to a satin and see how we can modify this. So one stitch direction makes it capped like that. I can come over here and say insert splice like this and move that to where I actually want it. And now I have a splice along here. So if you like that look, that's one way. I'm trying to think how else I could do this. I mean, it's really, do you want to cap it? Do you want to miter it? Things like that. Oh, there's a million ways you can do this. All right, I'm probably I know I'm exaggerating, but there's a lot of different options for you. You know, the fill is nice and convenient for adding, oh, another thing. Let's say you want to sweep it across rather than capping it. Yes, I could add a stitch direction here and a stitch direction there and there. So it sweeps the stitches around. Be careful with that though. This is not really an ideal way to do these sorts of things because look what just happened. I have a million stitch needle penetrations going into a pretty small area. And will that sew very well? Probably not. It'll end up looking like a mushroom because you have so much thread in this area that it's not ideal. So yeah, but the splice, that is a great little trick right there. Adding splice lines. Oops, all right, I don't need that one. I would just wanted to move that one up here. There we go. That's better. And then move them around to wherever you want it. Oh, and then you can come into the properties and add pull compensation, and it will overlap that splice line, and now you've got a nice overlap on it too. Okay, so Anna, does any of that help? Hopefully it does. All right, what other questions do we have? Oh, John, yeah, hooping caps. Hooping caps is, I don't know. I've done a lot of trainings on site, and even gone back to shops that want just specific hat training, and I can hoop a hat in about 30 to 45 seconds. But I can remember when I started hooping them, I probably spent 5 minutes per hat just trying to get it perfect. So I think it's a matter of practice, quite frankly, and just getting the hang of it. So yeah, the closer it is to the gauge when you hoop it, the less of a gap there'll be to your stitch plate. Oh, Anna, you wanted the splice that we did there? That's great. Okay. Any other questions before we call it a day? I don't seem to have missed any. So I will hold on a second, see if there's any others typed in. And if not, I will pop off for the day. Next week will be Thursday again. We're heading back to States. We just got back from States. Our crew, the kids, they took the freshman quad, took first place scholastically, so that was cool. The freshman double was second place. My daughter's boat, which she's a 6th grader rowing against freshmen, they took 14th in the state, so that's pretty cool. Super proud of them all. So, yeah, my daughter rowed bow seat in the freshman quad category. So, and her boat was 14th, so that was cool. All right, well, I guess I don't see any other questions typed in, and no one wants to hear me talking about rowing, so I will call it a day. And again, we'll be back next Thursday. If you have questions that you want answered, in the Facebook group, like particularly if you want me to try to create an example to discuss, whenever you see this little thing, picture pop up in the various Facebook groups, type your question in there, and I will work on an example to go over. All right. Well, you guys have a fantastic weekend. It's my one weekend off because States again next weekend. So I will talk to you guys next Thursday. Have a fantastic weekend. And until next week, have fun sewing.